The flashbang grenades erupted like thunder across the marble steps of City Hall, their blinding light reflecting off the windows of the towering government building as armored vehicles surrounded the structure in a perfect tactical circle. Mayor James Washington pressed his back against his office door, the sound of shattering glass echoing from the floors below, while outside, the chants of hundreds of protesters mixed with the sharp commands of SWAT officers positioning themselves behind riot shields. Smoke billowed from the east wing where something had caught fire, the acrid smell seeping through the ventilation system and filling his nostrils with the bitter taste of burning documents and melting plastic. His hands trembled as he reached for his cell phone, the screen illuminating his dark face with its pale glow. But the device showed no signal bars. "Sir, we need to evacuate now." Chief of Staff Maria Rodriguez burst through the door, her usually pristine business attire wrinkled and stained with dust, her black hair disheveled from running through the chaos downstairs. The sound of boots thundering up the stairwell grew louder, closer, more menacing with each passing second. James looked through the bulletproof windows at the sea of flashing red and blue lights, the news helicopters circling overhead like vultures, their cameras broadcasting the unfolding crisis to millions of viewers across the nation. Maria, how did it come to this? How did one woman's phone call turn our city into a war zone? The morning had started like any other Tuesday in October, with golden sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the mayor's office, casting long shadows across the polished oak desk where James had been reviewing the budget proposal for the new community center. The American flag hung motionless in the corner, its stars and stripes a symbol of the democracy he had sworn to uphold when the citizens elected him 18 months ago. He had been the first African-American mayor in Millfield's 200-year history, winning by a landslide margin of 63% after promising to bridge the racial divides that had long plagued the city of 400,000 residents. The victory had felt like a triumph, not just for him personally, but for every person of color who had been told they could never rise to such heights in a predominantly white community. Maria had knocked on his door at precisely 9:15, carrying the morning briefing folder and 2 cups of steaming coffee from the cafe down the street. "The Parks Committee approved your proposal for the Youth Basketball League," she had said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "And the Chamber of Commerce wants to schedule that meeting about the downtown revitalization project." James had smiled, feeling the familiar satisfaction that came from seeing his campaign promises slowly transforming into concrete results. The city's unemployment rate had dropped to its lowest point in a decade. Violent crime statistics showed a significant decrease, and the school board had just approved funding for new textbooks in every elementary school. "Any word from Councilwoman Patterson about the Affordable Housing Initiative?" he had asked, referring to the ambitious project that would bring 800 new units to the historically underserved east side of the city. "She's still reviewing the environmental impact study, but I think she'll come around," Maria had replied, making notes in her leather-bound planner. Her constituents have been putting pressure on her to support it. The first sign of trouble had arrived at 11:30 in the form of Officer Danny Klein, a 20-year veteran of the Millfield Police Department who had requested an urgent meeting. His face had been grim when he entered the office, his uniform crisp and his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Mr. Mayor, we've received some concerning reports," he had said, removing his cap and holding it against his chest. "There's been chatter in certain circles about potential threats against your administration." James had leaned forward in his chair, suddenly alert. "What kind of threats? From whom?" "Nothing concrete yet, sir. Just rumors and anonymous tips. But given the current political climate, we think it's wise to increase your security detail." The suggestion had made James uncomfortable. He prided himself on being accessible to the public, on walking through the neighborhoods and talking directly with constituents without the barrier of bodyguards and bulletproof vests. Officer Klein, I appreciate your concern, but I don't want to send the message that I'm hiding from the people I serve. With respect, Mr. Mayor, your safety is our primary concern. There are forces in this city that aren't happy with the changes you've implemented. As if summoned by those prophetic words, the intercom on James's desk had crackled to life at exactly 12:07. Mr. Mayor, came the voice of his secretary, Linda Chen. There's a situation developing downstairs. We have police units responding to multiple calls. Through the window, James had watched as squad cars began arriving in rapid succession, their sirens wailing and their lights painting the autumn air in urgent colors. Officers emerged with their hands resting on their weapons, their faces tense and focused as they formed a perimeter around the building. Karen Mitchell had been waiting for this moment for 6 months, ever since her candidate had lost the mayoral election by what she considered an unacceptable margin. Sitting in her silver Mercedes in the parking garage across from City Hall, she had rehearsed her performance one final time, her manicured fingers gripping the prepaid cell phone she had purchased specifically for this purpose. She was 54 years old, the wife of a successful real estate developer, and the former chairwoman of the Millfield Republican Women's Club. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup expertly applied, and her designer clothes suggested wealth and respectability. But beneath the polished exterior burned a rage that had consumed her since election night. When she had watched James Washington give his victory speech to a crowd of cheering supporters. 911 emergency. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was professional and calm. Karen had taken a deep breath, allowing a tremor to enter her voice. Please help me. I'm calling to report armed fugitives hiding inside City Hall. They're dangerous criminals, and they have weapons. Ma'am, can you provide more details about the location and number of individuals? They're in the mayor's office on the 3rd floor. I saw them go in through the back entrance about an hour ago. They had assault rifles, and they were talking about taking hostages. Her heart had pounded with adrenaline as she spun the elaborate lie, adding details about suspicious vehicles, armed accomplices, and overheard conversations about terrorist activities. Each fabricated element was designed to trigger the most aggressive possible police response, to create the kind of chaos that would destroy James Washington's credibility and perhaps his life. Ma'am, we're dispatching units immediately. Are you in a safe location? Can you provide your name and contact information? I can't give you my name because I'm afraid of retaliation. These people are extremely dangerous, and they've threatened to kill anyone who exposes them. Karen had ended the call and immediately dialed 3 more emergency numbers, reporting the same fictional scenario to different dispatchers with slight variations in detail. By the time she finished her performance, every available police unit in the city was converging on City Hall with lights and sirens, their officers believing they were responding to an active terrorist incident. The SWAT commander had established his command post in the lobby of the First National Bank building, spreading tactical maps across folding tables, while his team prepared for what they believed would be a complex hostage rescue operation. Snipers took positions on surrounding rooftops, their high-powered rifles trained on the windows of the mayor's office, while negotiators attempted to establish contact with the alleged terrorists inside. We have visual confirmation of multiple individuals on the 3rd floor, reported Sergeant Mike Torres through his radio. Cannot determine if they are armed from this distance. The individuals he was observing were actually James Washington, Maria Rodriguez, and 2 city councilmen who had been meeting to discuss the budget for snow removal equipment. None of them were aware that they had been classified as dangerous fugitives, and their normal movements around the office were being interpreted through the lens of tactical threat assessment. News of the supposed terrorist incident had spread through social media within minutes, drawing crowds of curious onlookers and concerned citizens to the streets surrounding City Hall. Television news crews arrived with satellite trucks and cameras, their reporters broadcasting live updates about the developing crisis to audiences across the state. This is Jennifer Walsh reporting from downtown Millfield, where police and SWAT teams have surrounded City Hall in response to reports of armed fugitives inside the building, announced the blonde reporter for Channel 7 News, her voice carrying the dramatic urgency that television producers loved during breaking news coverage. The crowd began to swell as word spread through the community, with different groups arriving for different reasons. Supporters of Mayor Washington came to show solidarity and demand answers about why their elected leader was being treated like a criminal, while his opponents saw an opportunity to validate their claims that his administration was corrupt and dangerous. James Washington is finally being exposed for what he really is, shouted Rebecca Turner, a frequent critic at city council meetings, as she held up a homemade sign reading, "Drain the Swamp." Her voice carried across the plaza, drawing nods of agreement from other residents who had never accepted the results of the election. But the counter-protesters were equally passionate and growing in number. "Mayor Washington is being framed," yelled David Kim, a local teacher who had volunteered for the mayoral campaign. "This is a racist attack on our democracy." The tension between the two groups was palpable, crackling through the air like electricity before a thunderstorm. Police officers tried to maintain separation between the opposing factions, but the crowd was becoming increasingly agitated as rumors and speculation replaced factual information. Inside City Hall, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The building's security system had been activated, locking down all entrances and exits, while ventilation fans circulated the smoke from whatever was burning in the East Wing. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows down the hallways, and the sound of boots echoing through the stairwells created an atmosphere of impending doom. "Mr. Mayor, the police are demanding that we surrender immediately," Linda Chen called through the intercom, her voice shaking with fear. "They say we're surrounded, and that resistance is futile." James pressed the response button, trying to keep his voice calm and authoritative despite the chaos erupting around him. "Linda, tell them that there's been some kind of mistake. We're not criminals or terrorists. We're the legally elected government of this city." "Sir, they're not listening to reason. They keep saying that they have credible intelligence about armed fugitives and weapons caches." Maria grabbed James's arm, her dark eyes wide with panic. "This has to be connected to what Officer Klein warned us about. Someone is trying to destroy your presidency through false accusations." But who would do something this extreme and why? The answer to that question was sitting in her Mercedes, watching the drama unfold through binoculars, while speaking on her regular cell phone to a man whose identity would shock the entire city when it was eventually revealed. Karen's voice was no longer the frightened whisper she had used with the 911 dispatchers, but the confident tone of someone who was accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. "Phase 1 is complete," she said into the phone. "The police have completely surrounded the building, and the media is covering it live. Washington's reputation will never recover from this." "Excellent work. Karen, our candidate will be very pleased with your dedication to the cause. Just remember our agreement. When he's sworn in as mayor, I get the position as city development coordinator, and my husband's company gets the contract for the new municipal complex." "Of course. You've earned every penny of that consulting fee we discussed." Karen smiled as she ended the call, already imagining the headlines that would dominate tomorrow's newspapers. Mayor Washington exposed as terrorist sympathizer, or City Hall siege reveals corruption at highest levels, would destroy any possibility of his political survival, clearing the path for her preferred candidate to claim the office through a special election. The fire in the East Wing was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated, sending thick, black smoke billowing through the building's ventilation system and forcing staff members to evacuate their offices. The acrid smell of burning paper and melting plastic grew stronger by the minute, making breathing difficult for anyone who remained inside. "Sir, we can't stay here much longer," Maria said, pulling her sweater over her nose and mouth to filter the smoke. "The fire department can't get inside to fight the blaze, while the SWAT team thinks we're dangerous fugitives." James looked around his office, seeing the American flag in the corner, the photographs on his desk of his wife and 2 daughters, the framed copy of his inaugural address hanging on the wall. Everything he had worked for, everything he believed in, was being consumed by someone else's lies and hatred. "Maria, I want you to call my wife. Tell her that no matter what happens here today, I love her and I'm proud of the work we've done for this city." "Don't talk like that. James, we're going to get through this. The truth always comes out eventually." But even as she spoke those words, Maria could see the doubt in his eyes, the weight of understanding that some lies are so destructive that they can destroy lives even after they're exposed as falsehoods. The damage being done to his reputation and the city's stability might be irreversible, regardless of what investigations might eventually reveal. Outside on the plaza, the confrontation between protesters was escalating beyond the police department's ability to maintain control. Angry shouts had given way to shoving matches, and several people had already been arrested when fights broke out between supporters and opponents of the mayor. "This is exactly what Washington deserves," screamed Paula Morrison, a real estate agent who had been one of Karen's allies in the Republican Women's Club. "He's been hiding his true agenda since the day he took office." "You're spreading lies, and you know it," countered Marcus Johnson, a local minister who had endorsed James during the election campaign. "This man has done more for our community in 18 months than his predecessor did in 8 years. The crowd surged back and forth like a tide, with police officers struggling to maintain barriers between the opposing groups. Television cameras captured every moment of the chaos, broadcasting the images to viewers who were forming their own opinions based on incomplete information and personal prejudices. Channel 3. News reporter Michael Stevens stood in the middle of the mayhem, his microphone picking up the cacophony of voices while he tried to provide coherent commentary for his audience. The situation here continues to deteriorate as supporters and critics of Mayor Washington clash, while police maintain their siege of City Hall. Smoke can be seen rising from the building, and there are unconfirmed reports of explosions inside the structure. The explosions he mentioned were actually the sound of windows shattering from the heat of the fire. But in the fog of crisis, every noise became evidence of violence. Every shadow became proof of danger. The truth was becoming irrelevant as fear and anger took control of the narrative. At precisely 2:30 in the afternoon, when the crisis had reached its peak intensity and the city seemed to be tearing itself apart, a black SUV with federal license plates pulled up to the police command post. 3 individuals in dark suits emerged from the vehicle, their badges identifying them as FBI agents specializing in domestic terrorism and political crimes. Special Agent Sarah Martinez approached SWAT Commander Tom Bradley, her expression serious but calm as she surveyed the chaotic scene surrounding them. "Commander, we need to talk immediately. There are some developments in this case that change everything." "Agent Martinez, we're dealing with a credible terrorist threat here. My men have the building surrounded, and we're preparing for tactical entry. That's exactly what we need to discuss. Our intelligence suggests that the reports you received were fabricated as part of a political conspiracy against Mayor Washington. Commander Bradley's face showed skepticism mixed with concern. We received multiple calls from credible sources reporting armed fugitives and weapons inside that building. All of those calls came from the same individual using different phones and disguising her voice. We've been monitoring this situation as part of a broader investigation into election interference and corruption in municipal politics. The revelation hit the SWAT commander like a physical blow, causing him to step backwards and grab the edge of a nearby table for support. Are you telling me that we've surrounded a government building and threatened the life of an elected official based on false information? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And we have evidence that the person responsible is still in the area, likely monitoring the situation to ensure maximum damage to Mayor Washington's reputation. Agent Martinez opened a tablet computer and showed Commander Bradley a series of photographs and documents that had been collected during months of investigation. The images showed Karen Mitchell meeting with political operatives, accepting payments from unnamed sources, and purchasing the prepaid phones that had been used to make the false emergency calls. We've been tracking a network of individuals who have been working to destabilize elected governments in minority communities across 3 states. Agent Martinez explained. They use tactics like false emergency reports, manufactured scandals, and coordinated disinformation campaigns to create chaos and force resignations. The FBI had been alerted to the pattern after similar incidents in Detroit and Atlanta had resulted in federal investigations that uncovered the broader conspiracy. Electronic surveillance and financial records had revealed a sophisticated operation funded by wealthy donors who were determined to reverse the gains made by minority politicians in recent elections. Commander, we need to end this siege immediately and shift our focus to apprehending the real criminals. Mayor Washington and his staff are victims, not perpetrators. But even as the SWAT commander began issuing orders to stand down, the damage was continuing to spread through the city like a virus. The fire in City Hall had grown larger, threatening to consume important documents and historical artifacts that represented centuries of local government. The protesters in the plaza were becoming increasingly violent, with several people requiring medical attention after being injured in fights. Karen Mitchell was beginning to realize that her carefully orchestrated plan might be unraveling faster than she had anticipated. The news reports were showing federal agents arriving on the scene, and her contacts in the police department had suddenly stopped returning her calls. She started her Mercedes and began driving toward the interstate, planning to disappear until the immediate crisis had passed and she could assess whether her identity had been compromised. But as she approached the city limits, she encountered a roadblock manned by state police officers who were stopping and questioning every vehicle trying to leave the area. "Ma'am, we're conducting a security check related to the situation downtown. Can you provide identification and tell us where you're traveling?" Karen's hands trembled as she handed over her driver's license, trying to maintain the appearance of an innocent citizen who was simply trying to avoid the chaos in the city center. "I'm just trying to get home to my family, officer. This whole situation has me terrified." The state trooper studied her identification carefully, then spoke into his radio using codes that Karen couldn't understand. After several minutes, he returned to her window with an expression that had changed from routine courtesy to serious suspicion. "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle and place your hands on the roof." "I don't understand. Officer, what's the problem?" "Karen Mitchell, you're under arrest for making false reports to emergency services, conspiracy to commit terrorism, and interference with federal elections. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists, with a sound that seemed to echo across the entire city, marking the beginning of the end for the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed Millfield's government. As she was placed in the back of the patrol car, Karen could see the smoke rising from City Hall in the distance, a visible symbol of the destruction she had caused through her lies and hatred. Inside the mayor's office, James Washington had been monitoring the developments through radio communications and social media reports on his staff members' phones. The realization that he and his colleagues had been the victims of a deliberate frame-up filled him with a mixture of relief and rage that left him struggling to find words. "Sir, the FBI agents are asking permission to enter the building and escort you to safety," Linda Chen reported through the intercom system. "They say the immediate threat has been neutralized. Tell them we're coming down. But I want to address the crowd first. The people of this city deserve to hear the truth directly from me, not filtered through television reporters and social media rumors." Maria grabbed his arm as he headed toward the door. "James, it might not be safe out there yet. The crowd is still angry and confused, and there could be more conspirators we don't know about." "Maria, if I hide in this office any longer, I'll be admitting defeat to everyone who wants to see me fail. I was elected to lead this city, and that means facing problems head-on, even when it's dangerous." The walk down the 3 flights of stairs felt like a journey through a war zone, with smoke still heavy in the air and broken glass crunching under their feet. Emergency lights cast strange shadows on the walls, and the sound of sirens and shouting voices grew louder as they approached the main entrance. FBI agent Martinez met them at the lobby doors, her expression professional but sympathetic. "Mr. Mayor, we have the situation under control, but I'd recommend making your statement brief. The crowd is still agitated, and we can't guarantee your safety for an extended period." "Agent Martinez, I appreciate your concern, but I need to do more than make a brief statement. I need to help heal the wounds that have been opened in this community today." The doors to City Hall opened slowly, revealing James Washington standing in the doorway with FBI agents flanking him on both sides. The crowd fell silent for a moment, as if collectively holding its breath, before erupting into a cacophony of cheers, boos, questions, and accusations. "My fellow citizens," James began, his voice carrying across the plaza without amplification. "Today our city has been the victim of a calculated attack on our democratic institutions." Television cameras zoomed in on his face, broadcasting his image to audiences across the nation who were watching the crisis unfold in real time. His clothing was wrinkled and stained with smoke. His face showed the strain of the ordeal, but his voice remained strong and clear. The reports of terrorists and weapons inside this building were completely false, fabricated by individuals who wanted to destroy your faith in the government you elected. Some members of the crowd began to quiet down, listening to his words with growing attention, while others continued to shout questions and accusations. The division in the community was visible in the physical arrangement of the protesters, with clear boundaries between those who supported the mayor and those who still believed he was somehow responsible for the crisis. "I know that some of you have lost faith in me because of what happened here today. I know that lies spread faster than truth, and that doubt is easier to plant than confidence. But I want you to judge me by my actions, not by the false accusations of people who profit from chaos and division." Agent Martinez stepped forward and spoke into a megaphone that had been provided by the police department. "Citizens of Millfield, I am Special Agent Sarah Martinez with the FBI. I can confirm that Mayor Washington and his staff were the victims of a sophisticated disinformation campaign designed to destabilize your local government. The revelation sent a murmur through the crowd as people began to process the implications of what they were hearing. The anger and suspicion that had been directed at the mayor began to shift toward whoever had orchestrated the deception. The individual responsible for the false emergency calls has been arrested and is facing federal charges. This was not a terrorist incident or a government cover-up. This was a criminal conspiracy to interfere with your democratic process. David Kim, the teacher who had been defending the mayor earlier, raised his voice above the crowd noise. "Who was behind this? Who tried to destroy our city?" James looked across the sea of faces, seeing his neighbors and constituents struggling to understand how they had been manipulated and divided by someone else's political agenda. The FBI investigation is ongoing, and I'm sure more details will be revealed in the appropriate legal proceedings. But what I can tell you right now is that we cannot let hatred and deception win. The fire department had finally gained access to the building and was working to extinguish the blaze in the east wing, sending great clouds of steam and smoke into the autumn air. The damage appeared to be extensive, but not catastrophic, with most of the important government documents and historical records stored in fireproof safes that had protected them from destruction. As the immediate crisis began to wind down, the deeper wounds in the community became more apparent. Trust between neighbors had been damaged, racial tensions had been inflamed, and the political divisions that had always existed beneath the surface had been exposed and weaponized by people with malicious intent. Rebecca Turner, who had been one of the most vocal critics earlier in the day, approached the police barrier separating her from the mayor. Her face showed confusion and embarrassment as she realized how completely she had been manipulated by false information. "Mr. Washington," she called out, her voice much quieter than before, "I owe you an apology. I said some terrible things today because I believed what I was hearing on the radio and social media." James walked closer to the barrier, close enough to see the tears forming in her eyes. "Rebecca, you don't owe me anything. We were all victims today of people who wanted us to turn against each other. But I should have known better. I should have waited for facts instead of jumping to conclusions. The people who did this are experts at manipulation. They know exactly which buttons to push to make us angry and suspicious. The important thing now is that we learn from what happened and work together to make sure it never happens again." The conversation between the mayor and his former critic was being broadcast live on multiple television networks, providing a powerful example of reconciliation and healing that viewers across the country could witness. Social media feeds that had been filled with anger and conspiracy theories began to show messages of support for the community's efforts to come together. Agent Martinez announced that the FBI would be conducting a thorough investigation into the entire network of individuals who had been involved in the conspiracy, promising that anyone who had participated in the attack on Millfield's government would face appropriate federal charges. This type of domestic terrorism will not be tolerated in any American community, she declared to the assembled crowd and media representatives. We will use every resource at our disposal to protect the integrity of your democratic institutions. The crowd began to disperse as the sun started to set over the damaged City Hall, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed to mirror the flames that had consumed part of the building. Emergency crews continued their work, securing the structure and investigating the cause of the fire that had complicated an already chaotic situation. James Washington stood on the steps of his temporary headquarters in the library across the street, watching his fellow citizens walk home to their families and their own struggles with understanding what had happened to their community. The physical damage could be repaired with insurance money and construction crews, but the emotional and political scars would take much longer to heal. Maria Rodriguez joined him on the library steps, carrying 2 cups of coffee that had grown cold during the long afternoon of crisis management. "James, do you think we can really rebuild trust after something like this?" "Maria, I've learned something important today about the people of this city. When they were faced with a choice between hatred and hope, between division and unity, most of them chose correctly. That gives me confidence that we can overcome whatever challenges we face in the future." The following weeks brought a flood of revelations as the FBI investigation uncovered the full scope of the conspiracy that had targeted not just Millfield, but dozens of other communities across the nation where minority politicians had been gaining power and influence. Karen Mitchell was revealed to be part of a network that included wealthy donors, political consultants, and media personalities who had been working together to reverse the progress of the civil rights movement through sophisticated disinformation campaigns. The evidence presented in federal court showed that Karen had received over $200,000 in payments for her role in the plot to destroy James Washington's administration, with additional payments promised if she succeeded in forcing his resignation or recall from office. The money had come from a super PAC funded by real estate developers and business interests who opposed the mayor's policies on affordable housing and environmental protection. Text messages recovered from Karen's phone revealed the cold calculation behind her actions, including detailed discussions about the best ways to traumatize the mayor's supporters and create lasting damage to his political career. One particularly damning message read, "The goal is not just to remove Washington, but to make sure no other minority candidate ever feels safe running for office in our community." The trial became a national sensation, with civil rights organizations and political analysts using it as an example of the ongoing threats to democratic participation in minority communities. Karen's defense attorney argued that she had been motivated by legitimate political disagreements rather than racial animus. But the evidence of coordinated targeting of minority officials across multiple states undermined that claim. During the sentencing phase, James Washington chose to address the court directly, speaking not as a victim seeking revenge, but as a leader hoping to prevent future attacks on other communities. "Your Honor, Karen Mitchell tried to destroy not just my career, but the faith that my constituents have in their own democracy. The punishment she receives should send a clear message that this type of domestic terrorism will not be tolerated." Federal Judge Patricia Holmes sentenced Karen Mitchell to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. In addition to the prison term, she was ordered to pay restitution for the damage caused to City Hall and the costs of the emergency response that her false reports had triggered. "Mrs. Mitchell," Judge Holmes said during the sentencing hearing, "your actions represent an assault on the fundamental principles of American democracy. You attempted to use law enforcement agencies as weapons against an elected official, and you deliberately created chaos and division in a community that was working toward unity and progress." The investigation also resulted in charges against 17 other individuals in 7 different states, dismantling what federal prosecutors described as the most sophisticated domestic terrorism network focused on undermining minority political participation since the civil rights era. Several high-profile political consultants and media personalities were among those indicted, sending shockwaves through the political establishment. In Millfield, the rebuilding process extended far beyond the physical reconstruction of the damaged portions of City Hall. Community forums were organized to address the racial tensions that had been exposed during the crisis, with facilitated discussions that allowed residents to express their fears, frustrations, and hopes for the future. The Millfield Unity Project, launched 6 months after the siege, brought together religious leaders, business owners, educators, and activists to develop long-term strategies for preventing the kind of manipulation and division that had nearly torn the city apart. The project included media literacy programs, conflict resolution training, and initiatives to increase civic participation among underrepresented groups. Rebecca Turner, the woman who had initially supported the conspiracy theories about Mayor Washington, became one of the project's most dedicated volunteers. Her transformation from critic to ally illustrated the possibility of redemption and growth that the community was trying to foster. I learned that hatred is easy, but understanding requires effort. She explained to a group of high school students during a presentation about the events of that October day. I let other people do my thinking for me, and I almost helped destroy something beautiful that our community was building together. Mayor Washington won re-election the following year by an even larger margin than his initial victory, with endorsements from former opponents who had witnessed his grace and leadership during the crisis. His campaign focused on the theme of resilience and unity, emphasizing the lessons learned from the attack and the community's response to it. The new City Hall, rebuilt with enhanced security features and expanded public meeting spaces, was dedicated on the second anniversary of the siege. The ceremony included speeches from FBI Agent Martinez, Judge Holmes, and several community leaders who had played important roles in the healing process. But the most powerful moment came when James Washington invited Rebecca Turner to join him in cutting the ribbon, symbolizing the transformation that was possible when people chose hope over hatred, truth over lies, and unity over division. Today, we dedicate not just a building, but a commitment to the democratic values that make our community strong, he said to the crowd gathered on the plaza, where protesters had once clashed in anger and confusion. We have proven that lies cannot permanently defeat truth, that hatred cannot overcome love, and that those who seek to divide us will ultimately fail if we stand together. The applause that followed echoed across the plaza and through the surrounding streets, carried by the autumn wind to every corner of a city that had faced its darkest hour and emerged stronger, more united, and more committed to the principles that define American democracy at its best. The siege was over, but the victory belonged not to any individual politician or party, but to the enduring power of truth and the resilience of a community that refused to be broken by those who profit from division and hatred. As the sun set over the rebuilt City Hall, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, the American flag flew proudly from its pole, a symbol of the democracy that had been tested but not destroyed, challenged but not conquered, by those who sought to turn citizen against citizen for their own selfish purposes. The story of Millfield had become a testament to the truth that in America, when ordinary people stand together for justice and unity, they can overcome any force that seeks to divide them.